Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me from Florida is my good pal, Phill Greenwalt, the Jolly Green Giant. How you doing, pal?
A little warm, but it's expected here in South Florida, so we're still in our summer season.
Very good. You actually got a taste of summer season by going all across the Western Theater here recently, didn't you?
I did. I actually, at the end of the conclusion of the trip, I realized if I had snuck in Texas, I'd been to every seceded Confederate state and three of the four border states as well. So didn't make it to Missouri or Texas.
You went through West Virginia, which acts like a seceded state. So
it's seceded from something. It just
That's right. It's seceded from secession, as the new book says.
Actually, I think there's a good book that just recently came out about that from a fellow ECW author, isn't there?
Indeed.
From secession.
Actually, I think I've got it right here. Just coincidentally, we're not talking about this today. Seceding from Secession, the Civil War Politics and the Creation of West Virginia. It's by Eric Wittenberg, Edmund Sargas, and Penny Barrick, since we're talking about it. But what I wanted to talk about today was basically, this is going to be Phil's version of the grade school essay, What I Did This Summer.
Or what I did in 7 days that was too crazy, that wasn't even planned, type thing. So, but yeah, wow, it's been a few years since I've had to answer that question in writing. I mean, do people still use notebook paper, or is it, that's when I had to respond to it. It was in those nice, remember those 3-line notebook paper things?
Yeah.
Patches are cursive. Yeah, that's the last time I answered that question. That paper is still in vogue. So,
and of course, you've just mentioned the use of cursive, and I know that several of our viewers and listeners just said they don't teach cursive anymore. I know that just went through someone's head.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you came to the Emerging Civil War Virtual Symposium and then decided to road trip. Tell us a little bit about it.
I did. The initial plan was, come up to the Virtual Symposium, see the ECW crew, and also then to visit the family in Baltimore, Maryland. With what went on with COVID, my sister had come back from overseas. So that was the genesis of the trip. And then I realized that I've always wanted to go see some of the battlefields in the West. And one thing that this whole pandemic has taught me is you can't plan for a rainy day, because suddenly 6 months of your life, I mean, so much has changed. So, and also it was kind of an experiment to see what states I would actually be allowed in, because you hear all these rumors about, oh, you can't go into this state or can't go into that state. So I figured I'd drive to whatever state would let me in, see the sites, drive the next one, and so forth. Or as the girlfriend said, I was probably the longest Uber delivery ever, because her best friend from college was having a baby and they needed to get a baby shower gift from Fort Myers, Florida to Westminster, Maryland. So I had to drive it as well. So I went through about 5 states, with a whole baby shower get up in the back seat. And none of the guys at ECW actually made fun of me, which I was glad about, wondering if I would get any questions of why there's a whole bunch of baby stuff in the back seat of my car. So,
yeah, Phill, is there something going on at home that you're not telling us about?
No, not at all.
I've got a 3-year-old and a brand new granddaughter, so I'm in no place to harass anybody about baby stuff.
So yeah, no, that was it was a conglomerate of a trip as well, and it was also a time to kind of use the road trip to think through some things, to just have time to disconnect, because I'm a big proponent of not trying to text or use social media when on the road. I won't say I do it all the time, but I don't want to self-incriminate myself, but it was time to kind of just detach and see America. So 13 states, 8 days, and made it back for a socially distant rock concert in South Florida. So that the girlfriend was playing in.
Yeah, so that you didn't necessarily have a choice about going to the concert, correct?
No, she said there was 2 shows because they were socially distancing. They said, can you be back here by 8 o'clock? And then I thought, sure. So Boca Raton had to be back at 8 o'clock, which meant also building in an hour, because I was coming the day before from Mobile, Alabama, which is in Central Time. So I had to make sure that I counted for that hour back into my life. as well, and I actually got there for the first show, so I was able to film it for some of her family who weren't able to make the trip, and then I could sit around and enjoy the second show without having to worry about filming or capturing that video, because you can't make mother upset. So I didn't want to like miss a song and receive some nasty questions from her mother. So yeah, it was kind of a way to end a great week and a half.
Now, this wasn't just like Phill wandering around America in Travels with Charlie style. He actually did hit up a bunch of Civil War stuff, which is why we wanted to talk a little bit today.
Yeah.
So kind of connect the dots for us. What did you see and where'd you go?
Certainly. So and it was basically the Civil War bucket list item of the West. My father years ago had gone to like Shiloh and Vicksburg and always talked about how amazing his battlefields were. I had two good friends who worked for the Park Service at Fort Donelson, and one of them has been kicking around the idea about possibly adding a book to the ECWS series about Fort Donelson. And I said, well, I have this time. Let me go see these battlefields. You read so much about them. I mean, there's great books about it. And being from Baltimore and studying most of the Eastern Theater, wanted to experience kind of where, as I think it was Kendall Goddard, one of them said, where the war was lost or won, depending on which way you look at it. So yeah, the trip started on a Monday morning. I went down the beautiful Shenandoah Valley. I also had this fascination with finding quote unquote, this is probably not PC, dead white guys, Confederate generals. There's an old publication, Confederates at Rest. It's also a great place. I knew it would be a good social distance activity because not many people are wandering around graveyards. And so I had to add a few stops in of that. Went to one of the highest elevations that a Confederate encampment was ever at, Camp Johnson, Camp Allegheny, as I crossed out of Harrisonburg going into West Virginia. Tried to see Rich Mountain Battlefield, but they were working on the road, and my rental car started to have difficulty on the gravel road going up there. And I looked, I had no cell phone service. I thought the better part of valor is discretion. I don't want to get stuck in the middle of West Virginia. Then I went into Kentucky, and that was where I really started to come up with this idea. We always hear how much Albert Sidney Johnson had to cover, this whole Appalachian to Mississippi River. And being in, cutting my teeth in Civil War history at the battlefields in Virginia and Maryland, we have a different definition of what space. And so on Tuesday of that trip, I actually drove from one side of Kentucky, out of the suburbs of Lexington, all the way to Paducah or Paducah, or however you pronounce it, on the other side of the coast, and then dropped down into Tennessee. And I realized, yeah, I went kind of like this, but I still was going across almost that whole defensive line that that Johnson had to cover. And I did it in a car, and it took me 4 hours with only one break for gas. And at the end of it, it was, I mean, there was a lot of open space. And I just realized that here's a guy who, for the first time, has to command large open area, command large forces, command political appointees, raw recruits, and then defend everything that points directly at the heart of the Confederacy. The rivers go the wrong way. The railroads don't go the right way. And that really got me thinking as I went into northwest Tennessee and hit Fort Henry, or let me rephrase that. I saw where Fort Henry used to be because didn't pack anything to go swimming. I thought about a kayak and going out and sitting there and giving the first like kayak tour ECW Facebook Live, but couldn't find a kayak. Didn't plan that far ahead. But just visiting Fort Donelson, which was just more than I expected. I had been told about it. I had been told that the visitor center wasn't open. It was nice to see a few other people out, just to connect with one guy who had worked for the TVA for like 40 years in a power plant, happened to be watching a bird from the water batteries. And he said, I was sitting there taking some pictures and reading the signs. And he was saying, oh, if you really want, here's some pictures of what it looked like 40 years ago before the river expanded, see this? And so he gave me like a de facto tour of what the river might have looked like in 1862 compared to what it looks like now in 2020. and it just was something like, you know what, here I drove 4 hours across Kentucky down into Fort Donelson and happened to be there on the same day on a random Tuesday that this guy happened to be there. He said he comes out to the battlefield once a week or once every other week. We just kind of connected and talked about that and what would have went on, because it was about 85 degrees, so it was exactly opposite of what the weather was like. But it also, yeah, it's one of those places where it's amazing how much. I'm always amazed at how peaceful battlefields can be, and you try to imagine the carnage that went on and the water batteries, firing, and the ironclads come up the river. As I'm sitting there trying to get this picture in my head, I hear like a disturbance in the tall grass, and there's a fox come out chasing a rabbit, and there's a few bald eagles nesting, and you're thinking, this is just completely difference of the preservation. Some deer are up on the embankment, not paying attention to the sign about staying off the earthworks. They're walking across it. So I figured they're northern deer invading the Confederate trench line. And then to see the Dover Hotel, which obviously you couldn't get into or whatever. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but there was a heated discussion going on there as well between a couple that was trying to solve something. And I figured, wow, if they put on some beards and wool uniforms, they could have been Buckner and Grant. And but it's still a place of peace, I guess. The Dover Hotel and the picnic benches outside. But just to be there with once I realized, and this is where Ulysses Grant kind of starts to gets his nickname. Unconditional surrender. And he would have walked maybe through that front door or walked down to see that view. And would he have ever known how far he was going to reach in the next, 6 years of his life, from that Northwest Tennessee post to the highest post in the United States as president? This is the 18th president of the United States. So yeah, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson was, and also went into Fort Hyman across the river in Kentucky. That was all very interesting to see. Before we leave that area, Paducah was where apparently some of the Lewis and Clark, George Wise Clark stepped off into for some of the Red War stuff. So you have that melding of the rivers and the wars there and so forth. So
the first time I ever came down through that area, I came down through the area called the Land Between the Lakes, and that's the first time I saw a buffalo herd out in the wild, which was pretty cool.
That is. No buffalo this time. Saw a bunch of other wildlife, but no buffalo there, or bison, or whatever you want to call them. So yeah, that was the first few days. So after that, I realized that I was just spending. I thought the next day in Tennessee, and wanted to go to Shiloh, and was told that Shiloh was an all-day thing, and it is. It is one of the most. Reminded me a lot of. I want to say, if I'd make a comparison, Antietam in the east, where it's still out in the middle of nowhere. A lot of decent monuments, but not over monumented, if that's a word we can use. It was also interesting to they had kind of been forgotten in time, in a way that it was the only Park Service bookstore that was open. They were actually allowing people in. The visitor center was open. So they had gotten some waiver, and no one told them that they couldn't have this waiver. So they were operating like they were. Obviously had plexiglass and all that up, but it was interesting to actually walk into a bookstore. So obviously you can see behind me, I have a few books. So I did have to make a purchase to support the National Park Service. So did see a book about Grant's last battle there. So I don't know if who wrote that one, but there was only one or two copies left. So. But what made it interesting with Shiloh was that, for me especially, was the seeing monuments for states that I never really experienced before. Iowa, for instance, how many troops from Iowa were there? But also uncovering an interesting fact that connected something for me, and that there was actually a battalion of Florida soldiers there, the 1st Florida Battalion, and one of the guys that commanded it after the major was wounded was a transplanted Marylander, Captain Poole. And so he led them through most of April 6th, the fighting. And he had to relinquish command on April 7th because he had yelled himself hoarse and he could not talk on the 7th. So he could still fight, he said, but he couldn't talk. And I thought maybe that's the last time a Marylander has relinquished anything because he couldn't talk. So, just the be at places where you read against like the Hornet's Nest or even on the roads there, you can understand why Wallace got lost a little bit and everything. It's still, even before Shiloh, you get off the exit there on I-40, and there's a big sign for the Battle of Parker's Crossroads. And so I stumbled upon a Civil War battlefield at Nathan Bedford Forest. There, I think it was late 1863, and neat little museum. A lady, very welcoming lady, right off the interstate. Literally, it's a neat little visitor center run by the county and the Preservation Society there. They got like an 8-stop driving tour and walking trail, and I felt really bad because didn't even plan to stop, and I was like, well, on the way to Shiloh, and she goes, you don't know how many times we hear that. Well, let us show you our battlefield. How many times have that not worked for somebody going, yeah, let me spend here at Parker's Crossroads, no offense to Forest, but skip Shiloh. So,
but you make it sound like, oh, right off the highway, here was Parker's Crossroads as you're on your way to Shiloh. But like Shiloh's not right off the highway there.
No, it's 50 miles, 40 miles down the road. Yeah. So, but it surprised me because being a Park Service employee, there's usually a limit on how far out you can put your signs according to the Department of Transportation. But show that Shiloh is such a place to visit, they had signs that far out about Shiloh battlefield.
Wow.
How to get there and everything. So, which I mean would be very helpful. And it drive. I don't know how many people get off and then go, I'm not driving another 50 miles. I thought it was right off the road, and then turning around and coming back on. I had a similar experience in South Carolina at Orangeburg. We tried to see a Revolutionary War battlefield. They said, oh, here's the exit of Orangeburg. You get off, and it goes, it's 47 miles. And I went, and never mind. And you turned right back on to I-95 there. So, but no, definitely worth the stop. Parker's, especially if you're traveling on I-40 and can't spend the time to get down to Shiloh, and you want that little battlefield excursion, Parker's Crossroads right there is definitely worth the stop, and probably can do it in a good hour or two, walking around, driving, and so forth. So very, very well signed park there.
So going back to Shiloh, so that's your first time ever at Shiloh?
Yes. First time. I mean, I've read a few of the books on it. I have to admit, I haven't read Greg Mertz's Shiloh book yet, but I've read a few of the bigger tomes that's on it. And yeah, it was almost exactly what I thought it would be, I guess. Out in the middle of nowhere, kind of I thought there'd be a little more about Pittsburgh Landing. Wasn't really much there when you went on that site. But otherwise, the ground kind of played into what I thought. And it's not a lot of times you get this picture of a battlefield and it's different than what the topography is, but you could sense the confusing nature of this battle and so forth, and understand. And one of the neat little parts, and one of the videos that's coming up later this month is one of the first contact. They have this little trail down there from the little parking lot area. You walk down this trail, and then it says at the little wayside that at the other side of this open field was where the Confederate skirmishers were coming out, that they met their Union counterparts that were out investigating. And you kind of stood there and realized that what it would have been like on that morning in April 6th, just kind of, we think there's some out there, and then you're this little patrol coming out of soldiers, and here comes, I think it was Alabamians leading this attack. I mean, the first thought through your mind of, holy crap, they are coming, or something. And just seeing that whole field suddenly people materialize out of the wood line would have been, I mean, just awe-inspiring, but also shocking, I guess. So it was really neat to see things like that, and just the amount of monuments that were around the landscape, I guess. I'm trying to struggle for the right word there. It was the amount of, it was something about, like, I want to say like caring a little bit. Like, it was they put these monuments up, and it was different than, hey, here's left flank, right flank, here's left flank, so forth. But just the amount of detail and everything that are in these monuments just kind of spoke to what this battle really meant for these guys that a lot of them saw the elephant for one of the first times, or trying to, you could see some of the descriptions commemorating what they tried to put down of what this battle meant, and just having a lot, like I am right now, a lack of words to describe what this 2-day slaughter was really about. I mean, with over 10,000 men falling, more than fell in any other war up to that time, or and so forth. It's just an amazing, serene landscape. I guess I can't really put into words. I have to go visit.
It really is. I think it's just a sublime experience because you get out there and there are plenty of monuments and markers, but it's all so tasteful and it all just sort of feels like it belongs to the landscape and it's not overwhelming and
Yeah, for sure.
Really adds to the sense of serenity and peace out there, I think. So my favorite Civil War monument is actually at Shiloh, the Iowa Monument. You mentioned the Iowa monuments a few minutes ago. The Iowa Monument, which is right near the Visitor Center, and there is that statue of Fame, it's called, and she's writing the names of the Iowa.
They have like the little script on the steps, whatever, as it comes down. I was just, we have a new ranger down here in the Everglades who just got here from Iowa, and I had to send her a picture saying that how impressed I was of all the monuments I've seen. That one was one of the most impressive. And I said, I know Iowa gets a lot of slack, but this one I have to give them some props for. So they really made, she goes, thanks. And Iowa usually doesn't make the news for a good reason. So
I love the Iowa Monument in Vicksburg too. They've got an incredibly beautiful monument.
That's a whole, we'll talk about Vicksburg. It's a whole different story there. So,
the hottest I've ever been on a battlefield.
The
hottest I've ever been on a battlefield was at Vicksburg. But going back to Shiloh, so how much time did you spend there, and what would you recommend for people who've not been to Shiloh before? How should they plan a visit to Shiloh?
So if you have, I hate to say, like, if you have 1 to 3 hours, here's what Phill Greenwalt recommends. I don't want to sound like the travel guy or whatever. But I mean, the driving tour is very inclusive, I guess. It is really great to see. And the way they do it kind of adds a little bit to the confusion of the battle. You got to cross back over yourself a few times. So you start off and around and everything. And I think that kind of adds to it a little bit, like the nature of how confusing the battle, because they do fight over the same terrain on April 6th and 7th as the Confederates come this way and then get pushed back. The visitor center, and if it's open, should be open. I mean, is one of the better ones designed. I mean, obviously all visitor centers can, hey, we need to add more technology or we need to add more tactile exhibits, but it was one of those ones where I think they did a great job of explaining what went on there and from the common soldiers upward. So definitely worth a stop. There's a national cemetery there. Part of the programs they give is a cemetery tour going through the markers and everything. It's also where Ulysses Grant spent the night. They have a marker there inside the National Cemetery. So if you're not big on visiting cemeteries when you visit battlefields, ensure that you do stop in the one at Shiloh, because you can see where Grant that night and had that conversation with Sherman and so forth on the night of April 6th. But what also adds to Shiloh is that the get out, of the car at certain stops, the Albert Sidney Johnston death site or the Hornet's Nest or site, but also there's ones about the even Native American history. There's the Shiloh mounds there, and there's a walking trail to go back to see the mounds. And most Civil War historians avoid, hey, I don't have that much time to visit the mounds, but if you go back there, there was a great view of the Tennessee River coming down there and everything. So it's really just something that I wanted to get a better perspective of the river. And so climbed one of the steps of the mounds and was able to see a great perspective of the there. But also what is most striking is the amount of what do they call community Confederate graves. There's multiple ones where, hey, there are unknown amount of bodies buried here and there and so forth. And that really, for me, it's something to die for your country and serve your country, but it's something to die and lay in an unknown grave, no matter what side you fight on, to give the ultimate sacrifice and to basically lay in an unknown grave. Just gives me a minute to realize how many people, if I was transported back 150 years, how many people like me who would have moved through society as a middle-class type person would not have had family money to send my body home or be found. And so it's just those are times that for me, you can put aside whatever side you agree on, north, south, whatever your viewpoint is, and sit there and realize that these guys believed in something enough to die and lay in an unknown grave. And it's just that Shiloh marking those in multiple places really spoke to me.
I know that Shiloh has identified 5 of those mass Confederate graves, but there are a number that archaeologists have not been able to actually find. They know they're out there somewhere on the battlefield, but they're not even marked. So it's not only an unmarked, but also a lost unmarked grave. What a lonely fate that is, I think.
Oh, it is. It's and to segue a little bit for just unknown, I made a slight detour before I left Lexington, Kentucky, and hit Frankfort, Kentucky, to see the grave of Simon Bolivar Buckner. And because I realized I was going to Fort Donelson, I've seen Grant's tomb. I should see Buckner's. And Daniel Boone is buried, or supposedly buried, right there. He may be still buried in Missouri. But one of the neat things uncovered was, and his name's escaping me, but he was a Marine and who is responsible for placing the United States flag on foreign soil for the first time. And he landed there in Tripoli Harbor, and he planted the flag in 1804 there in North Africa. And it's the first time the United States flag was planted on foreign soil. And so for all those former Marines that are watching this, they have it well marked. And on one side of the history sign, there's like state markers. It talks about them. And on the other side, it's just a big red field with the Marine Corps symbol. So you can't miss it if you're in that cemetery in Frankfort, the capital of Kentucky, that who planted that first flag on foreign soil. But yeah, talking about grave sites and everything, just interesting.
Speaking of grave sites in Kentucky, you also went to see John Breckinridge when you were in Lexington.
I did. Got to see John Breckinridge. John Hunt Morgan is also there. Basil Duke as well, who kind of escorted Davis near the end of the war and so forth. So I try to find as many Confederate graves as possible as I'm traveling through. But I do have to get back to the Vicksburg area because I got out of the car right as lightning struck nearby in a big major thunderstorm in Jackson, Mississippi, when I was trying to find the grave of William Barksdale. So I figured that was fitting for Barksdale, who was a great rhetoric, fire-breathing type guy. So as soon as I got out of the car, lightning struck, and I was like, you know what? This is a sign that I have to come see Barksdale on a better day. So, Mr. Barksdale, I'll come get you one of these days. So.
Before we leave Shiloh too far behind, I want to just kind of point out Attack at Daylight and Whip Them, The Battle of Shiloh by Greg Mertz, with a foreword by Timothy Smith. Tim Smith, who won the first ever Emerging Civil War Book Award for his book on Fort Donelson. Tim Smith is really known for his work on Shiloh and his work on memory and memorialization at Shiloh. He's got some great books. This particular edition of Greg's book, because it's disappearing in the background, is actually a Civil War Trust Preservation edition. They're trying to do a lot of work out there at Shiloh to fill in just a couple key parts of the battlefield so that battlefield's integrity is finally complete. So the Trust been doing some great work out there.
Well, man, as we're talking about books, I did buy Tim Smith's Shiloh book at Shiloh because I figured there's no better place. So they didn't have Mertz's book there, but they had this one. So trying to support the masters there of the battlefield writing.
And it makes it more authentic if you buy it there.
I did. I thought that's my thought, and is you cannot buy Shiloh at Shiloh.
So from Shiloh, where'd you head next on your trip?
Ducked down into actually Corinth, Mississippi, to see the new Civil War, the center there, everything. So great little museum. Some of the things obviously were off limits because of the COVID pandemic. You could go through the museum, but they had a lot of the touch screen things off or offline. And then walk down into the small little part of the battlefield there they have of Corinth, which obviously they fight there in the major battle in October of 1862. What is interesting too is a good friend Joe Elwin, who is a big Texan and fellow park ranger. I took a picture of every Texas monument, saying that look, I did pay my respects to the Texans, like Fort Donelson, Shiloh, and and Corinth and so forth, trying to find that. It's because it's the same type of marble that's used at every battlefield. And I think that's pretty unique. So, took a field. It was Corinth was kind of a can I fit it in type thing. And then I'm spending so much time there that I missed my one non-history Civil War excursion, which was trying to make it to Graceland in Memphis. So I got there after the last tour went out. So ended up having good Memphis barbecue on a picnic table outside of the entrance to the Graceland Museum and everything. So it's about as close to Elvis as I got.
Oh, that's terrible. Because of course Graceland's a fantastic stop, but his childhood home in Tupelo, Mississippi, was also really a really great stop to see too.
I had a choice which way to go, and went that way. And then, but no, Corinth is definitely interesting, and they have a neat little exhibit that so hardline Civil War enthusiasts may grumble at this, but as an interpretive park ranger, is always trying to find ways to connect the non-hardcore historians. Right outside the museum is they have all these little blocks, and they're sitting in this water stream, and it shows the different battles of the different years, and then also the Emancipation Proclamations written on one. It kind of shows how all this kind of broke apart, and then at the end they have like the words of Abraham Lincoln, I think it is, written on about the nation. So it's kind of neat to show how like these little blocks, all stumbling blocks in this waterway, led in the passage of time to a more unified country. So kind of gave you a perspective.
I was going to say that's one of my favorite Civil War exhibits anywhere is that fountain out back at the Corinth Visitor Center. It's fantastic.
It is, yeah. That was kind of a neat little touch, and so I have to give props to the National Park Service, who signed my paychecks there. So.
So after spending some time in Corinth, keep taking us on your journey.
So I went into Arkansas a little bit just to discover what. Never been to the state of Arkansas, so I challenged myself to try to visit a new state and country every year. And I might not make a new country this year, but I made a new state in Arkansas. So, but after getting lost and turned around, I realized that Arkansas wanted to keep me longer than I had planned. So I beat back out and made it all the way to Jackson, Mississippi that night. So I had to put down, and I figured that would get me into Vicksburg early the next day. But one thing I didn't check on the whole trip, and the only day that it happened, was I didn't check the weather report. And Vicksburg was a mess. I mean, it was to the point where there was flood alerts and everything on, and that battlefield was half closed, the driving trails and everything, because of the pandemic and so forth. There you couldn't get into like the USS Cairo museum. Half the driving tour was closed off. I was actually the only one in the on the battlefield for most of the time. I was inside the big Illinois monument when the Illinois or Ohio, the one that's one of the first stops. It's a big mausoleum now. It's Illinois. That's okay. I said it, and then I remember seeing Grant in there, and I was like, wait a minute, maybe it's Ohio, and I don't want to get Ohio upset if Mike Peters is watching this. But I was in there when, once again, the skies opened up and lightning happened and everything, and I thought, well, if I do get struck inside this marble monument, at least I'm in good company with Lincoln and Grant and all the other ones listed on the wall. So I was impressed with the viewpoints through there. The topography, once again, of the mounds and everything, and just having visited Petersburg and so forth, I was not prepared for the level of fortifications that are preserved inside the part of Vicksburg National Military Park that I was able to experience. And I know I have a few friends working in Vicksburg. I didn't call you up because it was a spur of the moment. Didn't know if I was going to make it to Vicksburg, so I apologize to anyone listening to this and going, Phill came through Mississippi and didn't tell me. I'll be back, I promise. But I did go to the old court with the courthouse museum because I mean it was raining buckets, so I might as well go in there. And it was interesting to see the collection of stuff they have, including that Vicksburg was the home of the first guy who ever packaged shoes. So he had fine leather shoes from Europe and didn't want them to get ruined, so he put them in like tissue paper into a box, and that's how he sold them. So that's where the modern day shoebox comes from. So you never know what you're going to find when you're visiting these small towns. So
Rob Orison, our good friend, told me that the Courthouse Museum was the greatest collection of stuff he had ever seen. And so he's like, you've got to go see it. And I went in there and he was not lying.
no, I mean, yeah, it's amazing what they've shoved into that building.
What they've shoehorned into that shoebox of a building.
There you go. Yeah. Including too, I to play on the word scaredy cat, I guess. I went upstairs and they have a house or museum host that is a gray furred cat, and I didn't realize that he was laying on, or he or she was laying on one of the display cases. So I was reading one, and I turned around, and the display case was high enough, being 6'5", that we saw eye to eye. And I thought, oh, that's a very well taxidermied cat. Until the cat just opened its eyes, and so yeah, I was yelled out in shock, but probably not the only person that's been shocked inside that courthouse in the years that it served the wall there. But yeah, I was like, did not expect to have a cat at eye level and then a cat to open its eyes suddenly, being the only one in the museum. So I couldn't blame anyone for the scream that emanated from my mouth. So.
Vicksburg is one of those battlefields. Again, you've got to want to go there because it's not, easy driving distance from nearly any place, and it really deserves more than a day, because the driving tour is extensive. The number of monuments and memorials that are there, some great museums. It really deserves a lot of exploration.
And then you have those outlying small battlefield sites and so forth, and even including. The reason I added Louisiana to the list was to go see the Grant Canal project, which is down this gravel type road or whatever. You kind of see there's a monument out there as well to some of the troops that helped participate in that, trying to cut the canal to change the flow of the river. And so just that they preserved that little spot over there. All the ways that Grant tried to take Vicksburg. I mean, and just to be able to drive back and get that, once again, that perspective. And also, too, some of the monuments that's off the battlefield, at Confederate Avenue, where they have monuments for each of the states, including Maryland and so forth, where you drive through and they're just sitting in people's front yards. So it's kind of an interesting kind of way to wrap up Vicksburg, I guess, that afternoon. So I definitely have to go back, especially when it's open past pandemic and when it's not a deluge of rain emanating from the sky. So
and get one of your buddies to show you around and
exactly. A few good ones there, yeah, too. So Andrew Miller and so forth. I will be back. So but it was one of the things I really didn't plan was to actually meet up with people, not to be rude. I just wanted to not be held to a time frame. And if I saw something, I was talking to Kevin Pollack a little bit about it. As well, as historians, we have a plan. But then when you go to a battlefield, we see a brown sign and we can get distracted and go on a tangent for half a day. So I didn't really want to tell people, hey, I'd be there Wednesday morning at 9 and then find something cool in Tennessee or Kentucky and then have to choose, do I see this or do I rush past it or whatever? So that was part of the plan, is just to not have a plan, I guess.
So from Vicksburg, where's going after that?
So I cut across the Mississippi and went into Alabama. And I realized that since it was only me and I could take detours, the quickest route obviously was to stay on the interstates and get to Mobile, which was the stop for that night. But that would make me pass the greatest small little town in Alabama that I could visit, and that is Citronelle, Alabama, which would give me the chance to see the third of the 3 Army surrender sites east of the Mississippi River. So it's where Richard Taylor surrendered to Edward R.S. Canby there in May of 1865 after he hears word of Johnson's surrender at the Bennett Place. Funny, and so I'm sitting there and I'm seeing the site and I'm about to film one of the videos you'll see, and my phone starts going off, and it's on ECW follower Mike Peters, who's very well connected to Central Ohio Civil War Roundtable. And he calls me and goes, Phil, what are you up to? And I said, you're never going to guess where I'm standing right now as I take this call. And I was surprised he didn't say Gettysburg, because that would be an obvious. I said, and he goes, I sent out a place random, and which was a good guess. I said, no, Citronelle, Alabama. And he goes, no shit, you're at the surrender site of Taylor? And I went, I am. He goes, are you lost? I go, no, I wanted to get here on purpose. And so it was all about an upcoming talk at the round table and how we're going to manage it with everything. But it was just interesting, to be there about if I'm going to get that random call from a guy and be able to share it with a friend there. But not much is there. There's a monument, a little marker, a monument or so forth. But Taylor's one of those guys that always impressed me. The highest ranking Confederate general, not the 10 West Point, connected to, of course, the President of the United States. Fought with Stonewall Jackson, managed some of the greatest victories in the Trans-Mississippi. Kind of just him and Stephen Lee are two guys that have always been found fascinating. They tend to be in random places throughout the whole war and just kind of slide through. I mean, and they're both lieutenant generals, although I think Stephen Lee is never confirmed. But Taylor is just one of those impressive guys and can be. Obviously, once again fought primarily out west, and then unfortunately gets killed in a part of what I think the Modoc War or something way out west after the Civil War. So just interesting the lives of those two men in the middle of nowhere surrendering. And there were some Confederate Marines and sailors that surrendered there as well. But once again, it always strikes me at these surrender sites that the personal gravitas or whatever you want to call it of guys like Joseph Johnston and Richard Taylor there, and even later on Buckner and Smith, that these guys could have kept it up. I mean, there was nothing to not have a guerrilla style fighting, and how much that Breckinridge and Johnston and Taylor and these guys just said, no, this is not what we're going to do. We fought this honorably. We're going to surrender honorably and go home. That's what's best for the Southern economy and Southern people. But I mean, just that there was not more of a let's get to the hills than there were type thing. So, I mean, being in the middle of Alabama, you're only 30 minutes north of Mobile, but you could have escaped into the interior and try to make it to the river or whatever. I mean, so.
Yeah, that could have been ugly.
Right, for sure. So.
What about another ECW book? Burt Dunkerley's To the Bitter End. Appomattox been a place in the surrenders, and this actually has a couple of chapters in about Richard Taylor's surrender in Alabama and Citronelle. And Burt made a special trip down there to trace those footsteps too. So you were a little underwhelmed by what you found in Citronelle, though, as I recall.
It was. I mean, obviously I wasn't expecting an Appomattox. I was expecting something a little more, I guess, on the line of Bennett Place or something, like just a state marker or something. And then, it was just, luckily HMDB helped me get there. But yeah, there's not much of a signage there or whatnot. There's a Boy Scout camp there right behind it. So that helps with signage. But no, I guess I shouldn't have expected more because it's not, I mean, it's completely overlooked. If you read most of the stuff besides Burt's book, it's like, okay, they surrendered here, there, and then out west. And so it's also overshadowed because it's in Davis is captured, I think, 6 days later, May 10th, I think, or something around there, May 10th, May 13th. So it's definitely overshadowed in the annals of the end of the Civil War. But I mean, it is, an underwhelming in a sense, but it's still cool if you have that chance to visit to see. I mean, here's another sign of that whole closure of the Civil War where it starts to wrap up. So.
And then it was damn the torpedoes on the Mobile.
It was. Mobile was actually just kind of I'm kind of too tired to keep driving and need a beer because I've never had a beer in the state of Alabama, and that's another of my little weird travel ticks is to have a beer in every state. So I realized that Mobile would be a good place to hunker down and damn the torpedoes. But there's also too, I had to pay my respects to the greatest Confederate general there ever was, who's buried in Mobile, Alabama, and that is Mr. Braxton Bragg. So his grave there.
And you said that with a pretty straight face too.
Yeah, I mean, Braxton Bragg, if you just from his early career through 8th at Shiloh, he's a hell of a general. It's after Shiloh that it starts to go downhill pretty quick. I mean, in West Florida, Pensacola, he's pretty top notch there in 1861. So it speaks that once you leave the state of Florida, your fortunes kind of just go. I don't know. It's probably why I stayed in Florida so far. I'm afraid my fortunes are going to go the way of Braxton Bragg. Now I try to find a few of the other there's a few generals buried in there, but the cemetery is very well laid out, but there's no markers or and everything pointing to it or whatever. I found another one, a guy, General Ledbetter, that happened to be just beside the road, stumbled into him. But yeah, I wanted to get over to Pensacola and try to see that area, because in a few years I'll be back for the American Battlefield Trust. I think they're doing a teacher conference, and trying to check out that area. There are a few Confederate generals buried in Pensacola. So it was Mobile, Pensacola, and then Tallahassee and Natural Bridge was on the agenda that day. And part of the reason Tallahassee was that is one of the unsung heroes of I call him the Thomas Munford of Confederate infantry, and that's Colonel David Lang of the Florida Brigade. Never reaches that brigadier generalship, but he survives, I mean, the whole war, and leads the Florida Brigade at that small little battle in southern Pennsylvania in 1863. But he's buried in Tallahassee. And I tried to get to a guy named Thomas Brevard, Confederate general, but he is the only general left in the state of Florida that I have not seen. And the cemetery is apparently only open for, you have to get permission from the Episcopal Church. And the gate was too high to jump, and the sign that said that if it's caught trespassing, it's a $10,000 fine. And I told Mr. Brevard that he's worth it, but he's not worth the $10,000 fine to the Episcopal Church. So I would have to write and get permission. But also buried in the cemetery is a relative of Napoleon, who actually nephew of Napoleon, who actually immigrated to Florida in the 1820s, and then became a Scion of Society. And him and his wife are both buried there. So it's kind of an interesting combination. Obviously, the Pensacola area the Pensacola Tallahassee area is steep with Spanish, French, British, American history, and so forth. So, and then to I would like to say the pivotal battle in Florida, one of the two pivotal battles in Florida, the Battle of Natural Bridge there in March of 1865, which is another video that'll be upcoming. It actually sees two Medal of Honor winners as well, U.S. naval sailors, sees African-American troops, and someone that you're familiar with from the time around the Chancellorsville-Fredericksburg area, old John Newton. Yeah, who made a fateful trip to D.C. with John Cochran and found himself in command of Key West and South Florida. So what happens when you don't obey the chain of command is you get sent to Civil War purgatory in Key West. But he tried to raid into that part of Florida, and they do a reenactment there, and it's a small little state park. Natural Bridge is where the St. Mark's River actually goes underground for a little bit, so you can actually cross over a natural bridge, and it leads into Tallahassee. And they were trying to cut, obviously, the railroad and stop Confederate incursions down along the coast, what's called the Cal Cavalry. But what makes it very, very interesting in Natural Bridge is it is the Florida version of Newmarket, because some of the infantry that march out is from the Florida Military and Collegiate Institute, which is now Florida State University in Tallahassee. But they're cadets, much like the BMI. They provide the major infantry force besides militia, home guard units, and artillery that the Confederates fight there. So it's kind of William Miller is the Confederate commander. But yeah, they fight USCT troops there, the 2nd and 99th United States Colored Troops, who brazenly attacked Confederate fortifications and actually come close to actually pushing them out and so forth. There's a little monument, nice little picnic area. So, they do a reenactment there in March of every year. But yeah, it ensures that Tallahassee will be the only Confederate capital east of the Mississippi River to not fall to Union forces, and also it will not surrender until actually May 10th, 1865, when one of the McCooks comes riding in and accepts the surrender of the Confederate government, state government. Although John Milton is the governor of Florida, is already dead by self-inflicted gunshot. So, but yeah, that was Natural Bridge was the last of the quote-unquote major battlefields that I hit. I did make it into Gainesville. There's a small little engagement there. I'm working on a few post about the Swamp Fox of the Confederacy, a guy named J.J. Dickinson, who will ride across the state and fight Union incursions in Gainesville and then turn around and ride back to the St. Johns River outside of Jacksonville, and as part of a company of the 2nd Florida Cavalry, and showing that he is Florida's version of Francis Marion or John Mosby or something. I was trying to get Kevin Pollack to enter into a post debate about who was better, John Mosby or J.J. Dickinson, and get them debating that. But I know where popular opinion, unfortunately, would probably go on that one there. But
yes, except that, of course, since Mosby became a Republican after the war, his reputational fortunes did suffer.
yes, and Dickinson will actually probably have better renown after the war outside of the state because he's the one that writes the Confederate military history. I think the Clement Evans, the volumes that came out, he writes Florida's version or Florida's portion of that, everything. So unfortunately, there's only one full book on J.J. Dickinson, but he is a remarkable guy that if he wanted to make it out of the state of Florida, he would have been very, very well known on the lines of John Hunt Morgan or a Bedford Forrest, because he had that type of charisma, that type of leadership. But he had become a transplanted Floridian and did not see the need. He basically kept Central Florida Confederate, which allowed for supplies, including cattle, to make it to the Army of Tennessee, to make sure that the railroads and continue to move food and produce through the state. Also, that the big Confederate convalescent hospital, Lake City in northern Florida, stayed out of Union hands, and also the pivotal bridge across the Suwannee River and so forth. He also captured a gunboat and thought that was pretty cool until he realized that he had no idea how to handle a all naval action. So it's kind of like, I got this new toy. All right, this is fun. I'm scuttling this because the Navy's actually coming after me. So, but yeah, no, it's just he also, what's interesting is he grew up in part of South Carolina around Georgetown, which ironically is where Francis Marion spent some of, especially his Revolutionary War service, trying to capture the town of Georgetown, South Carolina. And it's also kind of randomly where I think Lafayette came through that part of the Carolinas as well when he first came to the United States. So you have this like symbolism of the Swamp Fox, which is a cool moniker to have.
So you've alluded a couple times to some videos, and part of your self-prescribed assignment on this trip was to shoot some videos for the ECW YouTube page. So what can we expect to see when those start rolling out?
You can start to see, so I try to not put me in the image because I figured it was more, the scenery was more beautiful than this. If you want to see this in person or on video, then obviously watch this. But I did take ones of Shiloh the first day, or the first encounter. I tried to take ones around Fort Donelson. Not quite sure how they turned out because the gentleman that I ended up having a conversation with cut into part of the video, and then couldn't do one at the Dover House because of that other domestic conversation that was going on. So Shiloh, the Johnston site as well. One at near the end of the last day of Grant there on April 6th around the Pittsburgh Landing site. I took so many photos and videos that the one at the end of the Pittsburgh Landing site, I'll put a disclaimer, is that if it seems rather short and cut off, that's because my iPhone told me that I'd run out of storage. So I knew I was close to the end. So I spent every night in a hotel trying to download as many photos and videos as I could. Vicksburg, unfortunately, it was way too rainy to get any videos. There's one on Citronelle and there's one on Natural Bridge that I took as well. So those are the battlefields. So Shiloh, Citronelle, Natural Bridge, and possibly one on Fort Donelson if we can see if we can edit some of the stuff out there.
So we'll get to share a little bit of Phil's vacation.
Yes. So it was, it was an amazing experience. Being able to see what I was able to see and travel and so forth. Put about 4,500 miles on the rental car. So when they gave me the rental car in Fort Myers at the Southwest Florida airport, they said, well, you have unlimited mileage. And I thought in my head, that's going to come back to bite you in the rear end. So that is exactly what happened. So when they gave me unlimited mileage, I put it to the test. The guy goes, "You put 4,500 miles on this?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Where'd you go?" I go, "Well, that's a whole nother conversation." So yeah, I put it to good use.
Now you can just send him a link to this conversation and that'll answer his question.
Exactly. And maybe they can put this up on the video screens there at the airport going, "Please rent budget," or whatever. See all the experiences you can have. So, but one, I know we're near the end here, but one of the amazing things would surprise even the girlfriend Renee is that I said I came home with 12 books, and I also found a few of the old Blue and Gray magazines that were sale there at Corinth and Shiloh. I said, "Look, I come home with 12 books, but I said I only bought one of them." She goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, to stop at the parents, they wanted to hand me a few books, and then John Eric, another great ECW member, gave me a great set of books on Florida in the Civil War. So this is the cover one, The Battle of Lusty, a limited print one by a guy named Louis Schmidt. So I think his wife was glad to get these books that literally weigh about 5 pounds out of the house. So yeah, it was a great trip when you can get 12 bucks and only buy one of them. So yeah, 12 bucks.
You mentioned 4,500 miles, but a lot of us measure our Civil War adventures in pounds of books.
Yes, there would have been a lot more if some of the more bookstores were open, but I did plan for that not have too many bookstores open by actually bringing a box full of books so I could read and do the research in the hotels at night. So I did preface that the chance that I would not be able to hit Battlefield bookstores by bringing some of the books that were on my to-do reading list with me. So it's one of the sacrifices for a pandemic road trip.
We'll take one for the team. So, Phill, thanks so much for spending some time sharing about your time on the road. What a great set of adventures, and glad to have you back safely.
Oh, thank you, sir. Yeah, thanks for, I know the girlfriend and the family are probably glad that I'm sharing this with someone else because they're probably tired of hearing about this road trip, because what else are you going to talk about when you're in the middle of a pandemic and everyone's just kind of going from work to home? So I'm glad to share it. And yeah, definitely if anybody has any follow-up questions, email the blog. I'm glad to talk about it, especially if you're coming to Florida to see sites.
So Phill will have some videos up on the ECW YouTube page. He'll also have a couple blog posts from his trip coming up here later this month. So Phill Greenwalt, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, sir. Thank you. It was a pleasure.